Hello Sofa Squad, and welcome back to the sofa. That's my sofa, this is my dog Roscoe, and my name's Paul. Now y'all, today we're going to be talking about a case, a chain of events that is almost hard to believe it was real life. It's almost hard to believe that the person involved at the center of this hot mess is a real person, okay? So, Mr. Ruxpin has his little sofa seatbelt on. You need to go ahead and buckle yours up too. So the case we're talking about today involves a cam girl, a completely delusional guy, lust, greed, betrayal, entitlement, you name it. This case has got it, and it also took place in Florida, of course. Now y'all, before we discuss this total monster today, I want to thank everybody who makes the Sofa Squad possible. Y'all, it wouldn't be here without you. I greatly appreciate it. Everybody who likes to comment on the videos, who shares them, who interacts, and everybody who helps support the channel. I wouldn't be here without you, and again, I thank you, and so does Roscoe. Now, if you want to see other videos by me, and you like movie reviews, you like scary movies particularly, then check out my other channel. It's called A Slice, A Spice, and A Dice Movie Reviews. It's free, check it out. If you want to see like behind the scenes stuff, personal story times, some more like maybe commentary on absurd type crimes like Florida Man headlines, that kind of thing, then check out my members only / Patreon, and it's also a way to help support the channel. All the links for all that stuff as well as further reading and resources are down in the description below. Alright, so if your sofa seatbelts are buckled up, we are going to be taking a travel all the way to Chuluota, Florida. Now, this is where this completely unnecessary, horrifying tragedy took place. Now, it took place by the hands of a guy named Grant Amato. He was a son, he was a brother, he was allegedly a friend, but that's questionable at this point on all three accounts, but we'll be diving deep into that in this video. Now, the way we're going to be doing this video is I'm going to be telling you like the backstory. We're going to also be reviewing video clips like of the court testimony, also of the interrogation videos. They were very interesting to watch and very telling. So go ahead and make sure you're buckled up and let's dive in. Okay, so from the outside on Sultan Circle where the Amatos lived, I mean, it looked like they had it all, and in a way they did, which is what makes this even more senseless and even more tragic. Now, to really appreciate the true senselessness of it, we need to first look at the family unit, how they function, how they operated, how much they looked out for Grant and tried to prevent him from destroying himself first, which ultimately, as we know now, ended up just destroying them. Chad and Margaret were married and had raised 3 boys, Grant, Cody, and Jason. Grant and Cody were close in age. Grant was like a couple of years younger than Cody. Now, Jason was older than the 2 younger brothers by like several years, I believe. And also, he was his mother's son from a previous marriage, but Chad had adopted him at a very young age. Now, on Chad's professional website, he would describe his wife Margaret as like the moon to his sun. It was a very sweet relationship they seemed to have. Margaret herself, she was a very loving, caring person. She had actually rescued a horse that kind of like wandered up into their yard, made sure, you know, took care of it, nurtured it, all that kind of thing. And I think that's very symbolic for the type person that she is and how much patience, how much she wanted to see people succeed, and especially to see her own family and her own son, Grant, be able to overcome their hardships and continue on with life and be successful, thriving people. Now, Chad, the father, would graduate from the University of Florida in Gainesville, and he would graduate with a Bachelor of Science in Pharmacy. Now, his own father was a pharmacist, and so he would end up following in these footsteps. Now, also interesting is that all 3 of the slain family members, they were in the healthcare field. Cody worked at Advent Hospital East Orlando. Margaret was a client operations manager and healthcare division at Nuance Communications, and Chad Amato was a clinical pharmacist. Now, looking at Chad's professional website, both he and Margaret, they were like into a wide variety of stuff. Biking, hiking, horses, you name it. They were football fans. Like I said, they were, you know, Gators. They went to Gainesville, you know, did the game thing, did all that. And it honestly just seems like the family was really into living life. Now, video games were a major thing that Grant and Cody held in common with each other. And it sounded like it was like a very big bonding point for the 2 brothers. Now, this fascination, this interest, this hobby, whatever you want to call it, of anime and all that kind of stuff, this would lead them to taking what I consider like a bucket list trip to Japan. We will get deeper into that in just a little bit, but just like keep that in the back of your mind. Now the family were also like real big into guns, and that will become prevalent later when we get more into like the evidence and stuff like that. Okay, so you get a picture of the family life. You know, this was not like some disconnected family. These were close. These were people who were living life, so on and so forth. And again, as we talk more about the case, you'll get even more of a glimpse into how the family operated. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and move a little bit closer into the eye of the storm, to the perpetrator of the storm, Grant Amato. So like I said, the rest of his family, the victims at least, they were all in the healthcare field, and Grant was doing this too. He was going along with that. And he and Cody actually were kind of like side by side. They were going to school together, and they had these major plans that they were each going to like go to school, be anesthesiologist, and pursue this healthcare field. Now they were so close, they even had this like grand plan of, we are going to end up buying like mom and dad's house. The parents had bought a home in Tennessee that they were going to retire to, right? So like Grant and Cody were like, they were going to take the Florida home. They were going to have matching BMWs. I mean, they just had this kind of laid out, and it was all wonderful and dandy. Well, Cody kept going through. Cody basically held his end of the bargain up, but for Mr. Grant, that wouldn't happen. Now, Grant would eventually fail out of the anesthesiology school, okay? Now, that doesn't mean that it was just a hard stop for him right there. That's just like the next level, right? So he was still able to like get a nursing job, and he did that, but that didn't last long either. So let's go ahead and dive into the nursing school event. This is essentially, to me, in this story, in this case, this is like a turning point, right? And I would say it's a turning point for Grant. It is, but I think that the issues he had were already there. But it's definitely a turning point in what would eventually be the demise of his family. Now, if it were left up to Grant, he would have you believe that he had done nothing wrong, okay? Damn near falsely accused, okay? But that's far from the truth. So let's talk about the details of how and why he lost his job and the arrests surrounding that. So Grant was accused of grand theft at the hospital that he was working at with his nursing job. On June 19th, staff had told officers that 8 unordered empty vials of propofol, this was worth like over like $2,000, a little bit over. They found them in like a couple of rooms that were under his care, under Grant's care, and also the hospital pharmacist had, said that Grant had taken some, put it in his pocket, whatever. Okay, now I'm gonna read this quote here. This is like from affidavits and stuff like that. So because it's very interesting, I'm just gonna refer to my notes here. So Amato admitted that he stole the propofol for patient use. Now, this was coming from like a letter that he wrote to Florida Hospital, like an apology, and this letter that he wrote would be used as evidence, right? Okay, so he says, yeah, I took it, I was giving it to patients. He said that he was administering it to patients who were not being adequately relaxed by doctor-ordered medication. So he's like, look, I wasn't stealing this for my own personal use. I was giving this to patients who needed like more, sedatives or whatever. Now, of course, this is just what he was caught for, okay? God only knows how long this was going on and how much he was doing this to people. Now, these charges were eventually dropped, and he was able to kind of like slide out of this a little bit. Mind you, it would still kind of stick with him. This chain of events happened so quickly. But as you'll see in this case, time and time again, right? Number one, luck is on his side. And number two, his family comes to his rescue at all cost, right? So when he was arrested for this, Cody is the first person that he called. Cody would end up hiring him a real lawyer, and this real lawyer would help get him off these charges, basically. Now, one thing to keep in mind with this is when this investigation was dropped, all this kind of stuff, first of all, this is the kind of scandal that goes down in a hospital that a hospital doesn't want this out there, right? This is really, really bad. So, of course, a hospital is going to want to kind of just settle this up as quickly as they possibly can and move along, right? So that's also working to his benefit in this situation. Now, I did some digging around on Reddit, and so this is allegedly street we're entering into. This is non-fact. Consider it just opinion, not my opinion, but, just Reddit commenters, whatever. But it was rumored that he wasn't giving the patients these drugs because he felt they were, inadequate adequately under-medicated. He was doing it to basically knock them out so he didn't have to deal with them. And when I read that, I was like, yeah, I don't know this guy, Grant, but just a little bit, I know of him, obviously, at this point through the case and whatnot. I'm like, that sounds on brand, right? That sounds like the Grant that we would know. I could completely see him doing that. It has a very much of angel of death kind of vibe, or whatever they call the nurses that kill people or whatever. I have no doubt that if he had not lost his job and got caught for this, that he would eventually start playing God to people, right? Because who does that? Even if, pretend that like we had all the evidence, it was like, yeah, he just felt they were under-medicated. Who in their right mind would do that? Why would you even risk someone's life? I mean, it blows my mind. Okay, so this is where things, as you can imagine, start to really go downhill for Grant, right? As well as ultimately his family. So he has no job. He's living at home. He's got these charges. Not only has he failed out of anesthesiology school, he can't do that. Now his license is on the line. I mean, this is bad, right? So he's basically frozen, stuck, depressed at home. Now, his answer to this that would solve all of his problems is he was like, I'm going to become a famous gamer on the Twitch platform. Okay. Y'all, that whole thing has this vibe of like a teenager losing their first job at, you know, like the drive-thru or something, whatever, and then being like, yeah, you know what, F that job. I'm gonna be a famous rock star. I'm gonna show all of them. You know, and their mom being like, that's real good, honey. That's real cute. You just go play your drums in the garage. Now, I have nothing against anyone trying to become any of those things, right? I mean, for God's sakes, I'm making a YouTube video about this kind of stuff. So, you know, there's that. What I have a problem with is like this grown man, okay? Just the disconnect of reality where it's just like, what? That was your answer? There was no backup plan? So regardless, whatever, that's what he was going to do. Now, when he wasn't on his way to becoming like a mega famous gamer, okay, he was finding his way around the internet. And lo and behold, he found his way to some naughty sites, particularly ones that featured cam models. This is where things took a nasty turn. This is where he would meet the Bulgarian cam model. This was literally, this meeting was like a train wreck, okay? Now, he called her Sylvie, and we're going to go with that because literally I cannot pronounce her name. And even though her last name is out there, I just feel weird putting it here, right? So we're just going to call her Sylvie. That's what he seemed to call her. We're going to go with that. Let's meet her. Okay, so yeah, I can tell you just based on looks, she is so out of his league. And now we get it, she's a cam model, that's how she makes her money. You go get it, girl. But as you will see in this case, where Grant literally thinks he's in a relationship with her, and I mean, my mouth is just on the ground so many times. I have clutched my pearls 1,000,000 times through this case. Because I'm just like, how in God's name have you arrived at this place in life that you think you're in a relationship with this chick? I mean, it's just not impossible, but whatever. So what we're going to do is this now. We're going to be diving into different aspects of this. We're going to do a quick kind of overview of things so you can see where we're headed with this and just how turned up this case gets. Okay, so like I said, this meeting with Sylvie, I mean, this was the catalyst for all things bad for him. So Grant would go on to rip off his parents, his brother, his aunt, his friends, you name it, no one was off limits, to the tune of like a couple of $100,000, okay, spending on this woman. Not only spending it on her, he was sending her toys that she would model for him, lingerie, things of this nature, and she was very expensive to talk to. We'll get to that in a second. But he was keeping up this image, right? And he was portraying this image that he had basically what he and Cody were working towards. That he was a single bachelor with his big home and a BMW and da-da-da-da-da. Clearly tons of cash to spend on her, right? So she's none the wiser, right? She's doing her cam model thing and thinks, wow, I've found a really good customer, you know what I'm saying? So this would be short-lived though. And when I say this, I'm not talking this was like years, okay? This was like a very short amount of time that he did this. Now all this would keep going, of course, until this all came to light, right? And I mean, everybody's like, what? And what? You know? And so Grant's family, all these people, his father would find this out. Now, eventually what would happen is the family would reach out, contact this girl, let her know, look, Grant's not who he says he is. This would obviously change the relationship between him and the cam girl. Now, not only with this, the father would be, cutting him off. You cannot talk to her. You can't do this. And now, let me pause real quick on that. I use the word relationship very lightly, and I use it because literally that's what Grant thinks that he was in with this girl. Grant's level of delusion will become more and more crystal clear during the interrogation, during the trial, you name it. Y'all, these poor jurors were subjected to videos, pictures, you name it, of her in all sorts of undress, but also his interactions between him and her. Now, I'm going to play for y'all a really super pathetic one, okay? Go ahead, y'all, if you don't have your damn belt on, put it on right now, because you're going to fall out of the damn chair, okay? You're going to fall off the damn sofa over this one.
And I'm asking you if you can please, pretty please, send me one of your videos. I love it so much when you just send them to me. Yeah, I don't like buying your stuff. It makes me feel weird. Could you please send me one, though?
I mean, I can't roll my eyes hard enough. I mean, I'm not joking, y'all. I have a physical reaction to that video clip, right? Okay, first of all, the hat and the glasses, I'm like, please. Yeah, and I know that's petty of me, but literally, hearing him grovel, can you please send me one? I'm going to the mailbox. And the whole time I'm watching this, I'm like, he would have her think that this is his house in the background. You can tell it's a nicer house, right? And all this stuff or whatever. Probably his parents were in the house. And they're like, go get the mail, son. And he was like going out there, like a little loser or whatever. But then groveling. Okay, now the level of delusion where he's like, it makes me feel really weird when I buy one from you. And I'm just like, oh my God. I'm like, where did you think you met her? You would think he met her on Christian Mingle, and then all of a sudden she's charging him money for nudie pictures. I mean, I'm just like, I'm like, what? I'm like, of course you have to pay her for that. You're meeting her on a pay-by-minute website. Now, so y'all see, like, his behavior towards her, right? Now, during the trial and all this kind of stuff, I mean, when these pictures were presented, I mean, Christmas cards she gave to him, all this stuff, I'm sure he paid for them. I mean, the jurors, it's just plain and simple to say that, this guy is obsessed. Now, again, like I said previously, she ain't no cheap date. Oh, God. She was very expensive to talk to. And so let's talk about some of her rates and stuff like that. Now, this is not to be, like, demeaning towards her. It is what it is. But it's also to go to show how much money this dude was blowing, okay? So I've got some notes here. I'm just going to look over them real quick, so I'm going to kind of be looking here. Okay, so her shows were like $10 a minute to be viewed, right? And I'm just sitting here like, well, my God almighty, I'm in the wrong business. Okay, but for real, Grant's thing, his obsession with her, whatever, he would buy around 5,000 tickets for $600 so he could watch her. So this $600 a pop thing is, basically what it took. So this is how I related it. Imagine being in like high school, middle school, whatever, your first crush, whoever, I'm speaking from my time, I don't know how it works now, but like anytime you would pick up the phone to call that person, it was $600. And I'm just like, oh my God. Can you imagine the phone bill? The parents would die, right? I mean, again, I'm aging myself. This is back when like phone bills were a thing or whatever, or whatever. Anyways, so there's that. So you can imagine just the money he was blowing just to talk to her. Now, of course, this is when the dad is like, hello, what in God's name are you blowing through all this money for? And this is when Grant was like, look, Dad, I'm gonna be a famous Twitcher, and it takes advertising, and I'm spending that money on advertising so I could be a famous Twitcher. Now, of course, Chad would find out later that his son wasn't no famous Twitcher. His son wasn't gonna be no famous Twitcher, okay? He was blowing it on Sylvie. Now, obviously, this revelation would lead to huge arguments, very bad mojo between everybody, right? And so Grant at one point would run off. He was with his aunt. This would lead to him going to rehab. This would lead to an ultimatum being laid out with his father, right? And this would ultimately lead to the case as we know it of Grant taking the lives of his mother, father, and his brother. Now, this ultimatum, this, conditions that the father came to Grant with after a lot of this went down was like, if you want to stay in this house, this is what you're going to have to do, right? That would be like a huge catalyst for the chain of events taking place where they lost their lives. Now, and we're going to talk about that, but before I talk about that, I want to get a little bit deeper into Grant and Cody's relationship because it's very special, and it also just shows you more and more how literally this family, all the way down to the brothers, were doing anything they possibly could to save Grant from himself. So let's rewind a little bit. Remember how I talked about the arrest and all that kind of stuff? Cody was the first person, like I said, that Grant called, and let's hear what Grant has to say about that.
The first person I call is my dad. My brother. And
what is your brother's name? You keep
Cody.
saying my brother.
Cody,
Okay.
sorry. First person I call is him, and he was at work at the time, but he answered his phone, and I was just like, look, I'm freaking out. I've been charged with this. I've been told that my bond is this, and then he tells whoever was working that day with him, I gotta go. So then he calls my mom, he calls my dad, he smooths things over as best as he can. He's just basically saying, I'm going to pay this.
Okay, so can you imagine getting a phone call at work with that scenario going on, right? Now, mind you, this isn't your kid, this is your damn brother, right? I'm an only child, I don't have siblings, so I can't speak to what that might be like. But regardless, Cody, without question, smooths it over, you heard the Grant's own words, smooths it over, calls the parents, I'm going to pay this, leaves work, all this type of stuff, right? So no questions asked, it goes down there and does this. Now, we also know at this point that he'll go on to pay for the lawyer. Now, the more we talk about this later, we'll talk about more of the things that Cody paid along the way to try and help Grant. So that's what you're dealing with. That's the level that Cody, Margaret, Chad, we'll learn later Jason, were all willing to do for Grant. Now that's just one example right there of how much the family were willing to do with him. Now during the interrogation, we'll hear Grant talk about their shared interests like I spoke about earlier. And one thing that is interesting in this is not only does it further, show this friendship, this bond that they shared, but also how jovial Grant is with the cops when this part comes up in the interrogation. Let's watch it.
What do you like to do?
What do I like to do? I like to watch anime. Me and my brother kind of started doing that back 5 years ago, I'd say. He kind of got me into it.
What is it? I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I don't know what it is.
I mean...
I thought you said MMA. I'm like, okay, and then when you started explaining to it...
I mean, I
heard
guess
it like now.
It's animated.
Okay, so you see how animated he is about it. Like, okay, well, yeah, bro. And I'm just like, oh my God. I honestly, I think I need to like look at myself and maybe do some therapy, like the strong reaction that I have to this guy, right? Because he just turns my stomach. Anyways, but you see how alive he comes and all this, and all I'm thinking is this. I'm just like, first of all, kudos to these cops because you can tell they're doing great jobs at like really kind of breaking down his barriers and making that comfort zone for Grant. They're like, yo, talk about anime, that gets him talking. Okay, so kudos to the investigators, the cops, interrogators, investigators, whatever you want to call them. So all I'm thinking about during this clip is I'm like, this is somebody who has literally just slaughtered their family. I mean, maybe not 5 minutes ago, but very recently, okay, right? And so he's sitting here, the deadpan, no emotion to him. The only emotion I'm seeing is he gets excited to explain anime. I'm just like, what a disgusting human being. Now, this shared interest Grant would go on to explain is one of the reasons why Grant, Cody, and another friend who we'll end up hearing from here in a little bit took this bucket list trip to Japan. I call it the bucket list trip because I'm like, this sounded amazing. I mean, this is a major, major trip. However, things would happen on this trip. Again, pivotal things, Grant being at the center of them, that would lead to the demise of everybody. But also, one thing to keep in mind is you can only imagine how expensive this trip is, right? Now, I know we've just met Mr. Grant, but you can already guess, he didn't pay for anything. Would we have expected him to at this point? So let's hear Grant talk about the cost of the trip.
We actually just went to, me, my brother, and one of my friends, or I guess friends from high school. We went to Japan from December 1st to December 15th.
Oh, wow.
So we went because, I mean, and it was anime that kind of inspired us to want to go there.
Was that your first time going?
Yeah. First time actually.
Who went? You, your brother, and who?
Our friend Jerico.
Jericho.
He was originally a friend of my brother's back in high school, and then we all have kind of stayed close.
Because there's so much going on in this clip, and I want to talk about one aspect of it first, right? That's the part where he's talking about how they were friends, Jericho and whatnot. He's like, he was my brother's friend, and we all kind of stayed in touch. Now, we'll hear from Jericho also, and he does, he would describe them as brothers, right? So there is that, but I also got third wheel vibes off of Grant, and I don't know about y'all, but I've known brothers and siblings and stuff like that, obviously, and the ones where it's like one of the siblings they're not able to really make or maintain friends. Their friends are kind of like whoever their siblings' friends are, that kind of thing. It's usually doesn't end too well or whatever. It's kind of awkward. I just kind of got that vibe from this. And so also seeing and hearing some of the stuff that Grant would pull on the trip, I'm like, oh yeah, this makes that even, kind of reiterates it to me. Now, obviously, I didn't know any of these people. I ain't no doctor or lawyer. This is just my 2 cents. But also, the cost of the trip, right? So, here's Cody fronting the bill for this, paying for all this, taking him along. Keep that in mind so when we get to the parts of the things that Grant pulled on this trip, right? But let's listen to what Jericho has to say about this real quick.
Describe your relationship with Cody and Grant Amato.
I would have considered them my brothers. I met them a couple years after high school through a mutual friend. I graduated in 2006, so it would have been around 2008. We would play video games together, go out to dinner together, hang out almost every day before we started moving on into careers and things like that, but still talking regularly through the group texts, and still going out to dinner every week or every other week.
So here we hear Jericho. They were maintaining this friendship. They remain friends, so on and so forth. So it also goes into this whole narrative of nobody was off limits to Grant, what he would do. You know what I'm saying? And again, we're gonna get to all this in a little bit, but just the betrayal. Because I'm trying to even imagine people who I knew growing up, siblings, people I know now, where I'm like, what would happen if one of them wiped out their family? What would you even say?
I'd say it was probably about 10 grand total for all the stays and whatnot.
For each one of you?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it was 2 weeks. So
how did
you were there?
Yeah. In fact, how long you been out of work?
I've been out of work for 6 months, since June.
How did you pay? That's a lot of money to be out of work.
My brother.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. My brother.
What does he do?
He's a CRNA.
So here you have this super expensive trip. I mean, that's 10 grand, right? I mean, that's insane, okay? But again, Cody, probably no questions asked, was paying for this trip, and it was also him kind of hoping to help Grant out, right? Because this Japan trip is in the middle of this turmoil of all this family stuff going on with Grant, the parents, about the cam girl, all this kind of stuff, right? So there's that. So one would think that he might be grateful, indebted, one could even say, but oh no, not Grant. So Jericho, guy we just watched, remember how I was saying oh, they're supposed to be friends and da-da-da, but the stuff that Grant pulled, well, let's talk about that now. So Jericho would testify that they're on this Japan trip, yada yada yada. Now Grant did some weird stuff, like he disappeared at one point. He kind of like would duck off and do all this kind of stuff, right? So they're having lunch or dinner, some kind of meal, and basically Jericho's car, it's something that happens with it. He has to contact the car company. It's frozen because of charges that have been put on it. Guess what the charges were? If you guess $600 on an adult campsite and lingerie, well then bing, 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 you get a prize. Can you imagine the awkward silence at the table upon realizing this? I also think it's even like weirder and more bizarre that not only does he have to do the the $600, whatever, I mean, that is what it is, but then along with this, it's I have to send her laundry, I have to do this, like anything to keep this connection going, right? So he rips his friend off on this trip that his brother's paying for, and I'm just like, are you kidding me? I mean, how could you even look him in the eye? I mean, it's just so disgusting. Okay, now also something very interesting on the stand with Jericho is he would say, you know what, shortly after they got back from this trip, they were all at this friend of theirs house, a Turpin, and they're playing video games. And so at one point Grant had like go to the bathroom or something. Well, the bathroom was in the guy's bedroom, and so you had to like walk through his bedroom to get to the bathroom. So the closet was open, he kept the door open, whatever. So that happens, right? Well, I guess this guy was like moving or cleaning his closet out, something like that. And he learns that there was a handgun in there that he had that was missing, along with some casings that were missing. So that's very interesting. Remember how I said how the family had guns and all this kind of stuff? All this is going to become prevalent here in just a little bit. But keep in mind, the gun goes missing, all this stuff goes down. The event that happened that Grant did that took his family out would happen just a couple of weeks later. So you see Grant's world is shrinking. It's getting smaller and smaller. It's getting more desperate. No one is off limits. No one's bank account is safe. You name it, he is willing to do it to fuel his obsession and his addiction to this woman. Now y'all, when they return from this Japan trip, it gets even bleaker, okay? Because this is when it all gets exposed that he is not doing better. He is still talking to this woman. Now, we're going to listen to what Grant has to say about that.
I guess you could say behind the scenes, my mom would let me talk to her through her cell phone using Twitter. She would tell me, like, look, you have to keep it just basic, because if you say anything or if you entice anything or do anything like that, it might lead her to say something to like my dad or something.
So now the part that gets me about this is, Grant's claiming, oh, my mom was still letting me talk to her on Twitter and telling me to keep it neutral or whatever so that dad wouldn't find out, yada, yada, yada. Okay, so regardless, the way he thinks his mother for that is a bullet to the head. You're kidding me, right? So while he's saying that his mom's doing all this and helping him out and all that, let's see what he has to say about his father with the situation.
So he had found, like just the stuff that was related to her, and then, he erased my whole entire computer. He put a password on it, so it's like even when I came back up until Thursday, like I wasn't able to go into my own computer to look at anything.
Basically, he's treating you like a small child.
Right.
So all this turmoil goes down. Grant goes on a paid-for trip, rips his friends off on the trip, owes his parents are at home cleaning up his mess, has ripped his Anna, all this crazy stuff, right? Okay, so comes home. Dad has cut him off. Dad, locked him out of everything. You are on lockdown, all that type of stuff. Okay, so I know what it's like. Like, okay, I love my phone. It's usually in my hand. I get it, right? So I can appreciate for a normal person if they came back and like they were locked out of all their stuff, where that might be like, huh? Now, mind you, this is saying that they haven't done the stuff that Grant has done, right? This is like a person who hasn't done that. Grant probably freaked out over this, okay? I mean, he did, right? You know what I'm saying? So this was all she wrote. But what gets me is when, you know, the cops are just pandering to him. Treated you like a small child? Yeah. You know, and I'm just like, well, yeah, because you were. I mean, I would venture to say that there's some small children that might have better self-discipline than this guy. So let's hear it from the horse's mouth, though, about how he viewed this relationship with her, because I want to start looking at some of those dynamics because it's so delusional, and I think that's where it fuels this intense, just out there thing that he has with her.
You know, it wasn't really my intention to continue talking to this woman, but it just kind of happened. And then because there was like that emotional connection, I guess you could say, between her and me, like I like, you know, it felt like a relationship. You know, I didn't want to just stop cold turkey on it.
God. Just the cringe. First of all, did you see the cop lean back when he was like, it felt like a relationship? The cop was like, oh, he was so uncomfortable with that. I mean, that's my opinion. Because anyone can watch that and listen to it and be like, this guy is crazy. I mean, first of all, when he slid that in, like, I mean, it was like a relationship between me and her. There's feelings between me and her. And I'm like, oh, honey, I can tell you one thing. Her feelings began and ended at your bank account. Your parents' bank account, right? I am sorry, but every time I start getting into this dynamic of this case, this is all I can think of.
Napoleon, don't be jealous that I've been chatting online with babes all day.
Yeah. If you know where that is from, more points to you, okay? That is exactly what I keep thinking of. Well, I guess things are getting pretty serious now. I mean, that is Grant, okay? Oh my God, let's continue. Okay, so let's listen to Grant talk about how he describes like his communication skills with his father.
I was always the person in the family where, like, my brother Cody would interrupt my dad when he was talking. My mom would interject and say, you can't be saying that or whatever. But for me, I would just sit there and I would just let my dad talk so that he could say everything that he wanted to say.
Okay, so I have a little theory about this part. And again, this is on the assumption that this stuff is true, right? Okay, so when Grant's sitting here saying like, well, I would just let dad talk. I believe that, right? I think Grant was probably the type that didn't say anything. Like, he's a leech, right? He is a complete leech. So I think that he was the type that would just sit there and like just take things and never say anything and bottle it up. Like, he had this like simmering rage and resentment towards everybody around him, you know what I'm saying? And he just like played it out because look at the level of disregard that he held for all these people. Like, he didn't care about these people at all. Certainly nowhere near as much as they cared for him. So at this point in the timeline, right, things are getting really heated up for Grant, okay? His world is becoming like there's nothing left of it. He's running out of places to go to hide all this stuff, right? So December 19th, he leaves the house. Now, he does this in a kind of way that would almost allude that he might be going to hurt himself. And obviously, this causes alarm. This makes his family worried. Now, his mother would put out a missing persons report. She would, contact authorities. Now, it would turn out that Grant had just actually gone like 40 miles away from the family home to his Aunt Donna's home. Now, one might think, oh, okay, so he was just going to get away, maybe clear his head, da-da-da-da-da. But oh no, Grant's tawdriness didn't stop there. A very familiar pattern would take place at his Aunt Donna's house, and soon she started noticing some odd charges on her credit card. I am going to give, and you know what, I'm not giving door prizes out if you guess this right, because if you don't, then you haven't been watching the video. I will certainly lose this bet. But if you guessed cam girl model charges and lingerie, well then bing, 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 bing. Give yourself a pat on the back, and Roscoe says congratulations. Now at this point, again, Cody and Chad would step in, urging Donna, don't press charges. This is what else going on. I mean, Chad would break down crying and explaining the situation. Donna would say in the stand of like how much like he can't retire, like Grant has royally screwed them over, right? And so, but he's begging, I'm trying to keep him out of jail, trying to keep, just don't, right? So there's that. So just a few days before Christmas, the family would go to Donna's house and stage an intervention. And we'll get a little bit more into detail with this when we look at some of Jason's testimony later on. But for right now, we just need to know they stage an intervention. he reluctantly agrees to go to a place in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It's called Cornerstone. It's a rehabilitation place. And so he goes and, ends up getting himself checked in there. Now, go ahead and take a stab. Who paid for the bill? His brother, Cody, paid the $15,000 bill for this place. I mean, that is insane for a month, right? Or even 60 days, whatever it was, it's still crazy. Anyways, his brother Cody pays the bill, but guess what? Grant doesn't stay the whole time. In fact, he only stays just for a mere couple of weeks, and this is what Grant has to say that Cornerstone had to say about him.
So their final diagnosis of you was what?
That I was fine. That
Didn't need to be there.
Yeah. That I was fine. I told them all about like my living situation and how it had been stressful, and then it got better, and then now it's just stressful again. But they had all just said that it was just this isolated event.
Situational PTSD from...
Right.
Y'all, if there could not be a worse commercial for a rehab facility, it is this whole situation right there, okay? The fact that he is claiming that Cornerstone's like, well, they said I was fine. I mean, I felt better. I'm just like, are you kidding me? I mean, and maybe they've seen it all, right? If that's just legit, I'm just like, please. I think personally what happened is they're like, this guy doesn't want to be helped. This guy is completely delusional. You can lead a horse to the trough, but you can't make him drink, or however that saying goes. I probably messed it up. But nonetheless, Grant saying, oh, I was fine. It was an isolated incident. I just blew through that $200,000, ripped everybody off. Nothing really to worry about here. And they sent him home. Okay. So there's that. So the stay was short. Now, after he gets home from Cornerstone, though, Grant and his mom and dad, they would go out to lunch or something like that, and his father would lay everything on the line with this ultimatum. The rules were you could come back home, check into a hotel or get an apartment, or join the military, right? If he was going to come back home, he had to abide by some rules, obviously. Clearly not talking to this webcam model. Clearly starting to pay back the family. He couldn't look at naughty sites. No, like being on the internet after 12. He had to apologize to the family. He had to come up with an improvement plan. Chad put him on a PIP, a performance improvement plan. Okay, he was on a PIP, and so. There's all this stuff, and more power to him. You know what I mean? That's what Grant needed. Honestly, in my opinion, Grant needed to be in jail, but regardless, that's here nor there at this point. More power to him. He came up with this list of you have to do A, B, C, and D or else. However, that didn't last long. Grant continued talking to Sylvie, and January 24th, Chad found out, and I'm talking hit the damn roof. Yo, this is when Chad was like, you're done. You're done. And he was like, pack your stuff up and you're gone, okay? Sadly, this is what would be Chad's undoing. And I'm not saying like, oh, that was wrong of him to do that, because I know it takes a lot for a parent to get to that point. Like, clearly they really loved him, Grant, and wanted him to better himself, but they were at the point of tough love. They had tried everything, right? And so at this point, there was nothing left to do. That was the only choices to follow through of, you got to go. Now, the chain of events that would happen next, truly only 4 people know, right? Grant, Margaret, Chad, and Cody. Sadly, only one of those people is alive, though, and that's Grant, obviously. Now, through evidence, through lots of other things, we can kind of, connect the dots and all that. But truly, in those final moments, exactly how it went down, those are the only people that know. Obviously, Grant's the only one living. He has not told anybody, right? He has denied this. So on the morning of January 25th, Cody would not show up to work. This was highly unlike him, right? I mean, you can guess what you've heard of him at this point. This is not normal for him. And so his co-workers, he had like a little girlfriend at work. These people get really nervous, and they're just like, they can't get a hold of him. Something's wrong, right? So they contact authorities, and they're like, could you do a welfare check? Like, we can't get a hold of anybody at the house, so on and so forth. Police go there, and this will eventually lead to them finding the bodies of Margaret, Cody and Chad in their not final resting places, their final resting places in the home, where they were struck down in the middle of activities. Now his brother Cody, who bailed him out at every chance, was found still in his scrubs with a handgun a few feet away from him. His father Chad was shot twice in the head, and his mother Margaret was still sitting at her desk slumped over with a bullet to the back of her head. Now Grant would have you believe that he did nothing wrong, right? The last time he saw his parents and all, any of these people, was number one, at the house when he was packing his stuff up, and then that he met Cody somewhere in the neighborhood, telling him kind of like this is what happened, and that Cody would give Grant his credit card because Grant had never been on his own. And I'm just like, really? Okay, yeah, I find that highly unlikely, but whatever. Now, clearly Grant was already trying to set up some kind of a future defense and excuse for himself, right? Now, before we get to the trial, some of the testimony and all that, I want to look at some other parts of this interrogation. This interrogation from start to finish is like, oh my God, it is so bizarre, so cringy. It's very interesting to watch, like, the psychology unfold. And again, I'm not a psychologist or anything, but just watching somebody who you know is like completely guilty and their reaction to certain things and how they're behaving. One huge sign is the fact that they had sat there for like a long time, right? And Grant hadn't really asked like some major important questions. And let's hear what the investigators had to say about that.
You've been here with us. You think something bad has happened at your house. And to date, so long, you haven't even asked us about anybody.
Well, that's because for the last time that I was arrested, I mean, like, nobody would tell me anything.
Now, most people, when having an interaction with police of this nature, are going to be naturally curious as to what happened, okay? Like, just the fact that all this went down is not funny, but the absurdity of it is funny to me, because I'm just like, how could he even sit there with a straight face, not even once being like, did something happen? I mean, just a normal reaction would be like, what's wrong? Why am I here? Did something happen to my family? I mean, just without question. And he doesn't do any of this. Now, there is other evidence that's presented that he will try and wiggle out of, but I mean, he's really bad at it.
If you did that, you would have seen something. And there would be something out of the ordinary that you would have seen. If you passed that, you passed something out of the ordinary. What was it?
I saw like a news van, and then I don't think there might have been like a cop car. There was like traffic being.
Now, y'all, let's take a look at the scene that was like unfolding around his parents' house, right? That's what that last clip was in relation to, of him saying, well, I might have seen this. Let's just take a look here while we discuss a few things. So even if it was just cops at the end of the road, even if it was just the news van, he downplays that. Now, even faced with all that, when the cop's like, it's a natural response to like want to know what happened, to like pick the phone up, to call up something, right? Like, that is just, who wouldn't do that, right? But Grant, nope, he is going to downplay that. He's going to be like, nope, I just went to Panera, and he will continue to just try and play this off.
But you said, won't you tell me, and I'll tell you if you're being truthful. What'd you search?
On when I had gone to the Panera, I searched for like top stories, Oviedo or Chuluota or something like that.
And found what?
And then I saw that there was, it was like just the initial, like it had like a video, but I didn't listen to the video, but it had just an initial thing of that there was shootings in Salton Circle. But it didn't say like the address or who's involved. It was just like this is the preliminary.
Was that on one of the news stations?
Again, please. I mean, it's just that how much he tries to back out of it is just mind-blowing. Now, ultimately, of course, with his back against the wall, Grant is going to do what he knows how to do best, and that's blame somebody else.
So if anything happened in the home, to bring law enforcement there, what would you think happened?
That there was a shooting.
Between whom?
I don't know. Between Cody and my dad.
Now, he says this with a little bit of hesitation, like he hasn't already started lining that up with some evidence that we'll hear about here in just a little bit, right? Now, this behavior, this back and forth, this denial, all this stuff, it just goes on and on and on. The investigators will eventually bring in his only surviving, like, immediate family member, and that's Jason. Now, Jason would also end up taking the stand in trial. But let's talk about some of this dynamics that we see with Grant and Jason. Now, during Jason's time in the room, this discussion that he has with Grant, it's especially heartbreaking because, number one, Jason, knows what happened, right? He didn't have anything to do with this. So he's learning this information about his family. But also, it's like, he wants to give Grant the benefit of the doubt. He wants to believe him. I mean, who wouldn't, right? You don't want to think this about your brother. But he also knows. I mean, he just knows. Like, there's no denying that this is probably what happened. Another dynamic that I think is interesting with Jason is to watch the differences between Jason and Grant with their behavior, their tone of voice, all that type of stuff. Clearly, Grant acts like a void monster, that doesn't have any kind of emotion. And Jason is asking questions. He's acting in the way that you would think someone would act if this was like out of left field.
So who could have done this? I don't. So you didn't have any problems or troubles with this woman or the online? You didn't owe them any money? I mean, there's no like loan shark out looking for you or. No.
Now, again, these are the right kind of questions, like, is somebody out there, but to me, you can tell with Jason that he's just kind of putting this out there, but he knows, right? I mean, he knows, like, you can't deny this evidence. Obviously, we see Grant just digs his heels and he's not backing up off this, right? But what surprises me is that Grant didn't latch on to some of the things that, Jason was throwing out there, right? Because that's the type of person that strikes me that Grant is that he would be like, well, yeah, maybe I could blame Sylvie. But then I was thinking this. I was like, he's so obsessed with her. He's so in love with her. He probably was more concerned about protecting her than his own family.
I want to believe you, Grant, but you're the last person that I could put in that house. And I know what happened over the last 6 months. I can understand the troubles that you've gone through, but it's hard for me to think that you would break to this point. Mm-hmm. But who else can I blame? How are we going to find out who did this?
Now, this clip gets me every time because I don't have siblings, like I said. I can't imagine sitting across from my sibling who just wiped out my whole world, my whole family, and having this discussion with them.
I love you more than anything in this world, just like I loved Cody, Grant, and Dad. I know Dad was an asshole. I know Cody was an asshole. But they were our family, and they would have never done anything to hurt us. Mm-hmm. The shit you did, you could have been in jail. You would have been in jail for years. Mm-hmm. And they covered it up for you.
Now, this last clip I especially love because it's so accurate, right? The things and the lengths that this family went through to protect Grant really knew no boundaries, right? But none of that meant anything for Grant. Now, here's the other thing. At the end of the day, though, Jason knows what time it is. He knows that he can no longer trust Grant.
And it scares me that you want to leave here and not face what happened. Because you're putting my life at risk then. You're putting Donna's life at risk, Grandma's life. How do we know what you're going to do? What happened on the job interview last Friday?
Now, luckily, Grant's freedom would be very short-lived, and he would be arrested and charged with these crimes, and he would sit in jail awaiting trial. Now, Grant would keep himself busy. He would not be bored while waiting on trial. Now, on May 7th, the insurance company, The Standard, denied his request to try and collect benefits from his parents' policies, citing Grant's Amatos arrest in connection with his parents' murders. Now, Grant would also set up an email account, which, I mean, that is what it is. But the bizarre thing is that the password that he used was Shinigami, which means like the spirit of death who invites humans to their death. So, yeah, That's a little bit odd. Now, obviously, as you can imagine, he was contacted by reporters, people wanted to do stories, and he was always like being like he wanted to bail out, that he wanted to be able to work in his case from the outside because it was stressful and tiring in there and he couldn't get a good night's sleep and like all this stuff. So in my opinion, again, not knowing him personally or whatever, I just think that this was like, I've already moved on. Like, I want to fight my case from the outside. He was probably either gonna, do something to himself or run or whatever. But it was just like last week's news, what he did with his parents. And he probably, the first thing he would have done is contacted this girl with a credit card in his hand and some lingerie in the other. Now, luckily, none of that happened. He would go to trial, and the courtroom, as well as the world, would be introduced to the twisted world of Grant Amato. Now, during the state's opening, and honestly most of the trial, Grant would sit there flat, emotionless, trying to look as young as he possibly could.
She slumped over at her computer desk, in front of her computer, with her face down on her keyboard.
Now, the state would be tasked with the job of not only proving that Grant did this, but also answering for their jury as to why somebody would wipe out their entire family in this nature, right? Now, they would also have a central theme in this, which we can see through all of the evidence, and that is Grant's obsession with Sylvie, the cam model.
Grant Amato was and is obsessed with this woman. Sylvie is an internet cam model. I put quotation marks around the word model.
Now, when the lawyer did that little one-liner about putting quotations around the word model, Grant was like punching air over there at the defense table. He was probably like, that's my woman. Don't talk about my woman. We're going to throw down. So I was just like, oh, a little snarky state. Now, the state would outline this obsession of Grant's, Grant's facade of being some fancy, rich bachelor and all this, and how his parents would find out and how that ended and she found out. They would just outline all the details to this case.
And they let her know the lies that he was telling her and who he really was. And that effectively ended his relationship with Sylvie. Sylvie now knew that Grant Amato was not a professional gamer, did not own his own house, did not drive a BMW.
Sylvie now knew that Grant was indeed nothing more than a grade A loser. Now, the state would describe, what happened to the parents, how they were all found in the house, and how that Grant essentially was trying to set the scene to look like Cody did this and then took his own life. The only thing about that is that the casings that Grant, spread around the guns and trying to do this, they didn't match the guns. Now, the state would end their opening reading a letter that Grant had penned like a few days before this happened or whatever. And honestly, it is the most emotion that I have seen or heard from Grant, right? Now, this letter is addressed to I guess other people or guys or whoever that were in these group chats with him and Sylvie, and he's essentially coming clean and saying, yeah, you know what, I felt like I needed to be something more than I was, and I'm not this rich gamer person, and and it becomes clear in this letter that he holds his family, his brother, these people responsible for outing him. There is not any level of maybe I'm a crappy person and I shouldn't have done that. It's it's their fault. No one would have ever found that out. It's like he was not only obsessed with her, but also the fake life for himself that he built up.
And towards the end of that 8-page typed out letter, he says, I can't give up on her, and I will never, and the word never in capital letters, never go to someone else. She is my everything, and I will give her my life to simply be able to make her smile again.
Y'all, he writes this letter like he has a long line of women after him, okay? He was like, no, none of y'all matter. I'm sorry, she's got my heart. I'm gonna have to break y'all's, okay? I would have crawled under the defense table, changed my plea, and begged for old Sparky if I was him while the state was reading that damn letter. Now, as you've probably guessed by now and can't imagine, the defense had a pretty steep hill to climb. Now, they would, of course, remind the jury what their duty is, reasonable doubt, all that stuff. And they would outline like 3 main points for their opening.
Because the evidence will show these 3 most important facts in the case. Fact number 1, a complete lack of physical evidence linking Mr. Amato to the deaths of his parents and brother. Fact number 2, Mr. Amato had no firearm with which to commit these murders because he had sold all of his guns and had no access to any other guns that may have been in the residence. And fact number 3, police, when they entered the home of the Amato family, found a nefarious combination of drugs, guns, and ammunition.
Now, they want us to believe, as conniving and low and slimy as Grant was, that he didn't have any other guns that he could have possibly stolen or something like that from somewhere else, because he'd already pawned all the damn family's guns off, right? Didn't we hear somewhere earlier about a friend and him being at a friend's house playing video games, and that friend's gun came up missing, and then a couple of weeks later the murder happened? Now, just a little bit that we've learned about this family. These were not drug traffickers, okay? So they had some weed, They were gun people. We get that. The defense would have you think that they were hanging out with, El Chapo or something. You know what I'm saying? And it's just not the case. They're really grasping at straws here. I am all for everybody having a defense lawyer. Everybody's entitled to that, and they have to work with what they got. But they literally have so little on this whole situation that it's just really kind of embarrassing. The defense will give a timeline, their version of timelines, which is, the mother is at home. She works from home. She's there. The dad comes home. This interaction happens, and the dad's like, okay, look, you have to go. So the defense will describe this whole, back and forth of his father getting his possessions and giving them to him. Now, in this, we'll learn that, the dad's saying, yep, the dad gave him his credit card. They sat out in the driveway and talked for an hour. And, we also heard that, Grant saying that Cody gave him a debit card. Now, let's just pause there for 1 second. I just find that interesting. I'm like, okay, so you're going to kick him out. He's stolen so much money from you. But yet you're going to then give him credit cards and debit cards. And maybe they did really do that. I don't know. But I also have a full faith and confidence that Grant would have just taken those things once he took their lives. The defense will also state how Grant goes to Publix to use the Wi-Fi because he allegedly had a job interview the next day. He'll end up sleeping in his car there, leaving from there, going to said job interview. Then he will make his way back to the area, back to the house. Now, at this point is when he sees these news vans, he sees stuff going on. And again, we saw that in the interrogation, or the interview, I should say. Grant doesn't stop to find out what's going on. He just decides it's a better idea to go to Panera and get his laptop out and see if he can find any top news stories of something taking place. Now, he also doesn't contact his parents via phone. He's having issues getting his phone going. There's also a whole thing with the home phone that he's not sure when it was even used last. This is all allegedly, of course. And so his next thing is to just go ahead and get a room at a hotel and wait for his brother to email him. And he says that's how things happened last time this went down. Now, he says, of course, obviously he knows too, he never ended up hearing from them. And like I said, he didn't reach out on the land phone because he doesn't even know when that was used last. And so he just didn't reach back out. Mind you, of course, he had time to talk to his little girlfriend. Now, on this note, he would be brought in for questioning, and he was actually released one time, right? So he got to go home. Not I say go home, right? The cops put him up or something like that. And he was highly monitored, right? I mean, he was arrested, I believe, the next day. Now, again, the trial, right? This went on. It had all the trappings that we usually see. Crime analysts, gun experts, all these different kind of people coming up there and testifying in this case. But there's also a lot of emotional testimony, as there always is in these type cases. Jason, his older brother, he would take the stand in the case and shine some more light on the whole situation. Now, one thing that Jason would say that I was like, I can't imagine, is he would talk about when he got access back to his parents' home like a week later, like after all this went down. And he was testifying how all this expensive video game stuff was in there, all this stuff that was left in the house, further showing that this was not some kind of, a robbery, right? Now, Jason would also describe how when all this went down, the next day, the 25th, how police would show up around 12:30, how they would stay with him, search his car, because again, at this point, Remember, they don't know what happened, right? So they were able to find Jason. They want to make sure he didn't do it, right? So obviously it was established that he did not. But still, can you imagine being at work and that happening and your whole world just coming crashing down in that way? Now, also, Jason would go into more detail on the stand than we heard in the interviews about the lengths that they all went through trying to help Grant. Remember that whole thing about him going to his aunt's house and they did the intervention? Well, let's listen to what Jason says about that on the stand.
Grant had went to my aunt's house to get away from the house, predominantly, I think, my father. We all knew he was there. We knew he needed help.
Now, remember, at this point, Grant is, he goes up there, he's stealing money from the aunt. So that's all going on. So, yeah, he definitely needed help.
We had done a couple, I hate to call them stakeouts, but we took turns with another family member. Cody and my dad would sit outside the house at my aunt's house. We just wanted to make sure that Grant wouldn't walk away and go somewhere where we didn't know where he was.
So after all Grant had put these people through, stealing from them, lying, everything, they still loved and cared about him enough to do 12-hour stakeouts like the damn cops would do to make sure that he didn't go off and do something else incredibly stupid. I mean, my God, and to think that he could have cared less about that.
So me and my mom did 12 hours. Me and my brother and my dad did 12 hours. We did that like 2 shifts of it each. And then on the last shift, my mom had found a facility that was willing to talk to Grant.
Now, as we just heard Jason say, by the last shift, the mother had found a place that was willing to talk to Grant, to take him in. And so they actually ended up doing this intervention at like 3 in the morning at the aunt's house. They went up there, he came out, they had this confrontation. I'm guessing probably with ultimatums, all this stuff, there's really nothing else for him to do. And so he did reluctantly agree to go. Now remember, this cost Cody $15,000, right? And so Grant goes, and again, he doesn't stay for very long at all. Now, after Jason's emotional testimony and all this, the jurors would come back with a few questions for him, which of course they asked via the judge, who, let's just call Sandra Bullock. I mean, y'all, does she not look exactly like her? Now, the questions were as follows. Was he abusive toward anyone in the family? They are referring to the father. Jason says no. Why didn't he finish the program at Cornerstone? They're obviously referring to Grant. Jason's answer was his mother told Jason that the person running the place told him there was nothing more they could do for Grant. He said he was doing better and didn't feel the urge. Also, on January 26th, they asked, did you find his silent behavior to be normal? And Jason said yes. Why did the family do stakeouts? And to make sure that he didn't run away, he answered. Now, again, if we look back at some of those answers, the questions answers about the, what the Cornerstone said about Grant, I do think that he probably was just giving them lip service. I mean, you see how he interacts with the police. I mean, it wouldn't take many people much to be like, yeah, this isn't going anywhere. Now, some other notable testimony in this was out of Eric Brothers. He would read off a few little notes they found while searching Grant's car.
It begins, brother, they just told me what happened. Dad told you to pack your shit and get out of his house because you were caught texting that woman again. Grant, I'll take care of all your problems. I just need you back. I can't live without you, brother. I said I'd take care of all your problems at the house, and I have. No one will bother you again regarding this. Just please come home. I can't do this again. If you think I'm part of the problem here, then I've really lost you, and I can't take that loss after everything.
Now, these notes that Grant wrote, trying to prepare to make it look like Cody had left these, last mementos explaining why he did this traumatic event. This literally shows how absolutely desperate Grant was, but also how incredibly stupid he was and incredibly selfish that he was. I mean, this is so bad off. Just hearing those, I'm just like, that is so obviously fake. That's what blows my mind, is just for such a manufactured crime scene and evidence and stuff like that, You would think that, I mean, I don't know where he got his ideas from. They are so bad and so poorly executed. And again, thank God they are, so that he's serving time where he belongs. Now, others would also testify that, you know, the casings, like I mentioned earlier, they didn't match up to the guns that they were laid around in this absolutely manufactured crime scene. It was very poorly done, and nobody was buying this. Now, also it stated that a thumb drive with a lot of the explicit pictures that were taken into evidence for the trial, for the case, a thumb drive with those was connected to his computer at 11:32 p.m. on the evening that he took his family members' lives. Now, just 7 minutes later, Cody's phone was hooked up to Grant's computer, but what's called the trusting process wasn't completed, which most likely meant that somebody who, like, the password wasn't able to go through. That process wasn't able to be completed because of that. There's also testimony about one of Chad's fingers being wiped clean of blood, and Grant having used that to access his phone to be able to get into accounts and things of this nature. So the picture that was painted there was that some event went down. This is my 2 cents here. Some event went down, this blow up happened, and Grant basically took the lives of each family member, you know, one by one. They were all taken by surprise. I mean, his mother was slumped over at her desk where she was sitting, the father coming in from work, Cody coming in from work, and then Grant basically pillaged their stuff. He probably took their credit cards, he probably wiped his father's finger clean, accessed their phone, did money accounts, all that kind of stuff, and ran off to go talk to Sylvie. I mean, that was what he wanted to do. And when he got what he wanted, it was like, okay, what now? And he started maybe manufacturing this crime scene. We clearly see that with the fake letters, with the casings left around, and I guess he legitimately thought he was going to be able to play that off. Somebody who is so big into computers and things like that, it shocks me that he didn't have enough common sense to realize that they would be able to trace his every step on all these different computers and to see exactly what he was doing. And that trail would come back to haunt him. Now, finally, it would come down time for each side to make their closing arguments. Now, the state would reiterate the absolute ridiculousness of these claims. It wasn't a random robber. There was nothing at the scene that showed proof of this. This wasn't a drug crime or retaliation. The amount of marijuana and paraphernalia found at the home didn't constitute the parents as drug lords. They just knew how to relax. And Cody didn't take his parents out and then himself. The misplaced gun shelves, the false letters written by Grant, it all showed that Grant was trying to orchestrate this narrative. Now, the defense would say that the police had already decided it was Grant. That Grant could have run off, but he chose to stay. Now, what is interesting is what you don't hear the defense say, and that's Grant's innocent. Grant's wrongly accused. You don't ever hear any of that. It's like all like technicality type stuff, right? Now, also, I will give Grant to this. He was able to do all this and not get blood on himself. He kept a pretty clean crime scene going for himself as far as that goes. But again, he's a nurse. He probably, or was a nurse. I personally think he probably knew enough to know how to do certain things and whatever and clean up and yada yada yada, right? Now, his attorneys do bring this up, right? Because this is like, if you were to talk about some hard, like, okay, lack of evidence or whatever, I mean, there is that, like, how could you do this and not get that kind of evidence on you? But it's a very weak argument, and it just overall feels hollow. Now, it's no surprise that Grant would be found guilty on all charges. He stood, and in similar fashion, with no emotion, void of life, staring off into nothing while his fate was handed to him. Now, later during the penalty phase, the state would come back and ask for a capital sentence, and they would cite numerous aggravating reasons as to why this should be his sentence. Now, the defense will go the route of basically kind of playing to jurors' emotions, feelings, how they personally feel about giving someone a sentence like that. It gets a little political, it gets a little biblical. Now, the defense would also actually go as far as to try and paint this as to be more of like a crime of passion, and which I thought was pretty ballsy, but ultimately the defense will ask for life without parole for Grant. Now, there would be witness testimony during this. We would see from victims' families, acquaintances, Cody's girlfriend, and we would also have more heartfelt testimony from Jason. And when Jason did get up there, he still would say that he still loved his brother. And that just is another thing that goes to show the complexities of a case like this. And I also think that this will help Grant in the end. Now, the defense would call up a forensic psychologist to the stand for their portion. Now, he's going to testify that Grant should be giving life without parole, that he doesn't seem to be like a long-term, prison management, custody management issue. He probably won't be that much of a threat. He probably won't reoffend while being incarcerated. So he would be good for, like a long-term, spend the rest of his life in prison kind of a thing. Now, personally, what I think, they could get up there and say that Grant saved an entire beach full of whales that had washed up by giving them each mouth to mouth. It ain't gonna matter, okay? The atrocities that he did to his family, I'm just like, oh, honey, absolutely not. Now, Grant would be feverishly writing notes through all this. So the jury would come back and they would all agree that yes, all the trappings are there, all the aggravating factors, yes to all of this. He does qualify for this ultimate sentence, but at the very end of it, they would spare him his life. Now, one could say that once again, his family helped him out. I personally think that Jason's testimony is the only reason why they spared Grant his life, right? I just feel like the jury felt like, you know what, we're not going to take his life. We can't do it, but he deserves it, but we're not going to do it. So the judge would hand him his life without parole sentences for his crimes, and she would leave him with some parting words of, may God have mercy on your soul. And that's the best that Grant can hope for in this horrifying situation that he brought upon himself as well as his family. He's still sitting in a Florida prison where he will remain for a very long time. Hopefully we will never see him see the light of day. Hopefully also while being incarcerated he has no access to people like Sylvie and can't even conjure up other situations like that. I imagine he's probably not going to have a very easy time in there. He is a very sheepish, passive, dweeby kind of dude. And what he did is absolutely horrible, and that usually doesn't go over too well. So that is the story, the obsession, the addiction, the absolute cringe fest of Grant Amato. I hope you've enjoyed this. Roscoe certainly has. He's a little bit traumatized. And the bear has snuggled his little sofa seatbelt several times, but he is glad we're coming to an end. Now, once again, thank you everybody for being here and making the Sofa Squad possible. I really appreciate it. It wouldn't be here without you. If you want to hear me do certain cases or whatever, just drop me an email. All those links are down below. And until we meet back here at the old sofa, I'll see you soon.